One of the really best things about owning a bookstore is when you get to introduce friends and former colleagues. And that is the case for me tonight. But even better is when the friend and or former colleague, and Sarah is both in this case, has written a really, really good book. So it's kind of the trifecta for me. So I'm really so happy to have her here tonight. We were just talking about how we had a drink a couple of years ago, and I'm working on a book too. Hers is done. Anyway, so I was like, wait a minute, how's your book done already? Mine's like so far behind. So congratulations. It's an incredible accomplishment. I think most of you know that Sarah was the chief speechwriter for Michelle Obama and a senior speechwriter for Barack Obama. We bonded, I think, starting in 2008 when we both worked for the Hillary campaign for president. We've had many mutual experiences writing speeches, and now she's gone on to write this terrific book. Sarah graduated from Harvard and Harvard Law School before following a distinctly non-legal career path into government and politics. But I think it's fair to say that her legal training and her lawyerly mind have been very useful in her most recent project, which is a reclamation of her Jewish roots. Oh, my goodness. A reclamation of her Jewish roots and identity through a deeply personal examination of her own relationship to Judaism. If you know her, you know that in her 30s, she discovered that the religion she was born into speaks to her in ways she never imagined during tortuous Hebrew school classes as a child or as a bat mitzvah. But what led her back to Judaism as an adult is the subject of this new book, and it's such a terrific book, the title of which is Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism After Finally Choosing to Look There. So what makes this book so good? For starters, obviously, she's a fabulous writer and storyteller. Anybody who's ever read a Michelle Obama speech that she had anything to do with knows that. She brings enormous intellectual rigor to this project, and I think to all of her work, it's fair to say. She has a dry and self-effacing wit, which leavens an otherwise potentially very dry and serious subject. But I think I was thinking about this today, mostly what I think makes this book so great is that she had the courage to dive into this very fraught subject at all. The lessons and meaning of Judaism have occupied Jewish scholars and intellectuals for several thousand years before Sarah came along. And to have the bravery to go and look into it with a lot of self-reference, honest self-reference is so hard. And she does it with open eyes and open heart and an open mind. Although I think Sarah would agree that she has a mission in writing Here All Along, there's no proselytizing or badgering in its pages. There's no pretense about who she is or isn't, but there is definitely clear purpose. There's humility, and there's honest self-reflection and humor as she examines the ways Jews today think about their religion and cultural identity. And as she traces her own transformation from a once frustrated, confounded, and detached Jew to one who today finds herself in love with Judaism. Her book makes a persuasive case for how, if one is willing to dig beneath the surface, the teachings of Judaism have important applications for people trying to find deeper meaning in their lives amid the chaos and confusion and uncertainty of the 21st century. Tonight, we are also incredibly doubly lucky that Dana Bash will be in conversation with Sarah. No, that's quite all right. Dana, I think if probably some of you have seen her in this role here before. She's always very generous in moderating and being in conversation with authors. We're so grateful to have someone of her skill and insight here with us tonight. And for those of you who don't own a television or live in a cave, just in case, Dana's the chief political correspondent for CNN. She's a familiar presence in pretty much every big political thing that CNN does, town halls, political debates, reporting on the presidential campaign, and all other manners of political activities that we all find ourselves obsessed with these days. We are so very lucky to have her join us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Sarah Hurwitz and Dana Bash.
Thank you. So I'm usually, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? No. Hold on.
Let's see. Oh, I think mine's on, right?
How about mine? Is mine on now? You can hear me? Okay. So, because the nature of my job is such that I don't get to tell people I'm interviewing how awesome they are. So, this is a great treat to be able to tell the person I'm interviewing how awesome you are. And that's an understatement. This book is incredible. I absolutely loved it. I actually got 2 copies because I left one at the pool on vacation. There's so many reasons which we'll get into, but first we just heard a little, a reluctance to name drop. I am not reluctant, so I will tell you what the reference was to Michelle Obama's tweet just a little while ago, saying the following: Sarah Hurwitz is a brilliant writer with a big heart and a kind soul, and I'm sure At Here All Along will reflect her thoughtfulness and eloquence, which I depended on for so many years. I'm so proud of you, Sarah, for sharing your journey and your voice with the world.
I still like hearing it. I get a little choked up. I was lucky to work for a singularly extraordinary woman. It was just, I cannot get over my luck in working with her and so many of my amazing colleagues in that office who are here tonight. And I just have to say before we get started, you're awesome. Like, I have spent my entire career in politics watching this woman do the most important work in our democracy with such courage and intelligence and fairness and common decency. And it is awe-inspiring. It is so important. And this is like amazing. And Lissa, you are the best. You've been my friend and mentor for so long, and I am so happy you're here. So, all right. I just have to say the things that are true.
So because I started with Michelle Obama, that was a pretty big job that you had, completely separate from this book that you did about your journey in Judaism. Before we get into the specifics of the book, talk about the transition from being at the White House, from being Michelle Obama's speechwriter, to finding your way as a Jew, as an adult.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big transition, right? Writing for someone like Mrs. Obama, she knows who she is, and she always knows what she wants to say. So that job is to basically type very fast as she tells you what she wants to say, and then to arrange it nicely into, on a page. It wasn't my voice, it was her voice. It was her words, her ideas, her language. So that was a very different role. And suddenly, now I'm using my voice, right? Which is sort of, it's like, what is my voice? How do I find this? And I think also the transition from writing to be heard to writing to be read, very different skills. So I just said very different skills, which is a sentence fragment. And I don't think anyone here was thinking like, whoa, that grammar, not acceptable, right? It's like written language is so unconstrained, right? You can do a lot, whereas spoken language is so unconstrained, whereas written language, there's like punctuation and grammar. And that was really, had to learn how to use commas. So that was different.
Except on Twitter.
Except on Twitter. That's right, places. Except on Twitter.
I want to start with something that you talk about at the end of your book in your conclusion, which is the question you put out in the book, which is, why bother with Judaism? And you answer yourself by saying, I wrote this book in the hope of exploring this question, in the hope of people exploring this question for themselves effectively.
Yeah, and it's such an important question, right? Why bother with this? I think for a lot of us for many years, the answer was like, because of the Holocaust and Israel and don't intermarry, which is like, wait, that doesn't even really make sense. Like that can't be the answer. It can't be guilt. It can't be fear. For me, I think the answer to that question of why bother with Judaism is, number one, because of its content. I think that it offers such amazing wisdom about how to be a good person, how to live a really worthy life, and how to find profound spiritual connection. I also think, but like lots of traditions offer that, right? And I think the best answer to the why be Jewish question that I found comes from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, great Jewish writer. And he talks about, he asks you to imagine a library. And you're in this library and you can read any book you want. You can take any book you want. They all have wisdom about how to live a good life, how to be a good person, how to connect with God, whatever. You're reading. And then you pull one down from the shelf because you notice it actually has your family's name on the spine. It's like, whoa, my family's name is on the spine of this book. So you pull it down and you start reading it, and you eventually realize that actually each page is a generation of your family sharing with you what they think it means to be a good person and live a worthy life. And it's generation after generation after generation. And then you get to the final page and it's blank and it has your name on it. Now, are you going to just put that back on the shelf? Maybe. I wouldn't. And I sort of think that in a way is what it's like, that's part of why Judaism, right? I think there's a lot of moral wisdom in the world, but this is mine, right? This is the wisdom of my family and my ancestors generation after generation. So I think, is that rational? No. Is it still really important? Yes.
And you weren't posing that question just for the reader. You started out posing that question for yourself because, like a lot of people in America who are born Jewish and have a Jewish identity, a lot of it is cultural, not as spiritual, very assimilated. And, sadly, a lot of us as American Jews have a, first, second grade education as a Jew, and you were not alone. You were one of those people, which you're very, very open about, and you're open about as being a kid, how much you didn't like it, which
so true.
Which makes you in good company with a lot of kids who are going to Hebrew school.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you put your finger on something really important, which is that I think a lot of the most amazing, edgy, insightful, radical wisdom in Judaism is not really accessible to children, right? Like, there's lots of fun stuff in Judaism for kids. I don't mean to, put that aside, but like, you can't really begin to appreciate it until you are probably about a teenager, which is precisely when we all stop learning, right? Which is kind of an unfortunate mismatch. And so as a kid, I just thought, like, this is so boring. And this man in the sky God is so dumb. Like, I just, even as a 12-year-old, I just thought, like, really? Do people buy this? But I didn't have the maturity and the intellectual development to understand what Judaism had to offer. And I think as an adult, returning to it with a grown-up's mind, I'm just able to find so much radical, countercultural, interesting, moving guidance about what it means to be human.
And how did you begin to make that search as a grown-up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny story. This was not like a big existential crisis or some, deep spiritual journey. I broke up with a guy I was dating. I had a lot of time on my hands and just needed to fill it. And someone sent me an email about an Intro to Judaism class. And I just thought, like, that sounds like a Wednesday night. That's great. I'll just do that. I know. Everyone's like, no, but you were looking for me. It's like, no, I really was looking to fill 3 hours. And so, seeing these materials, these texts as an adult, it really moved me. So I took another one. And one of my friends was like, really? Like, do you walk into these classes? And they're like, all right, Sarah Hurwitz, who brought the ringer? Like, really? But, I didn't know very much. I knew as much as the people who were
Which
converting.
was hard as
with my name,
point, with
right?
your name.
It's like
people
everyone
assume you know everything.
assumes that I'm like a rabbi, and I was not. So bad. I mean, the people who were converting knew much more than I did. They were much more converted, much more committed, much more learned, which is pretty amazing, right? I'm a big fan. Jews by choice brings so much to Judaism. Big fan. And so, so I started learning, and I did a lot of reading. That was my way of learning, was just reading books because, for the cost of a library card, you can have a private lesson with the greatest Jewish minds in history, right? You can just sit down with Abraham Joshua Heschel and hear from him. And I think that was, for me, a great way to learn.
And you were in the White House still at the time.
Yes.
And one of the things, I was laughing out loud at the part of the book where you sidled up to the bar, I think it was a bar, with your White House colleagues, and you're like, what are you talking about? And they said, oh, we're talking about the afterlife. And you're like, oh my God, let's talk about the afterlife. And they looked at you and said, no, like after the White House.
That is a true story.
I laughed out loud. Isn't that funny?
It's a true story. It was a little awkward. I was like, can we talk about God too? And they were like, what? One of them is actually here tonight who was with that conversation. It was definitely, it was a little, right. It was, I remember when I went to my first Jewish meditation retreat, and, this was like this wild experience where you're like praying and meditating for a week and you're out in the woods and you're talking out loud to God.
We're going to get to this.
We're going to get to this. Yeah. But I got back from vacation and we were sitting around and everyone was talking about what they had done. And it was like, oh, I went skiing with my girlfriend. Oh, I had a staycation. And my boss was like, so what did you do, Sarah? And I was like, Not much. Quiet, quiet.
So you mentioned this. This is the other thing. I emailed you while I was reading it, going, "You have to tell me more about this," because, especially somebody who talks for a living and somebody who writes things for people to say out loud, it's kind of remarkable what you did and sounds pretty awesome. Which is, Sarah went on a retreat where she was not allowed to speak for a week. Go.
This freaks out Jews. I know. This is like
And by the way, it was a Jewish retreat.
It was a Jewish meditation retreat. It's a very small bunch of us who secretly, bunch of Jewish introverts. No, it was, it's a week-long meditation retreat where you're totally silent. You don't talk for a week, and you spend the day in meditation and prayer and listening to lectures by the rabbis who lead it. And, I was a little skeptical. I'm not a woo-woo kind of person. I don't want to go feel my spirit animal in the woods. Not my thing. So I was really skeptical of this, but I was blown away by it. The process of just sitting quietly and letting your mind get quieter and quieter and doing, traditional Jewish prayers and listening to these lectures about Jewish texts, I found it really moving and really transformative. And it was... My first retreat was the first time I had any felt sense of the divine, right? Which, I hate the word God, just too man in the sky for me, too small. But however you think of the thing that whatever it is you connect to, that was, I think, the first time I had a sense of that. And it was really very powerful. I see you have a tab that says God.
Yes, I do. By the way, this is my mother is here. This is what my mother does, and I learned from her.
I love this.
Yeah.
I tab things as well.
Okay, good. So on page 63,
Okay.
One of the things you talk about in here, which you alluded to, is the notion, even as a kid, of God being like the guy who looks like Abraham Lincoln with a white beard instead in the sky, and that was not something that was accessible. So you go through in a very detailed, fascinating way about what God really is. And in here you say, let me repeat because it's really important. Other than monotheism, there is no universally accepted Jewish creed or article of faith defining the divine. Explain that.
Yes, and this is surprising to many Jews. I think I assumed before I started learning that there was some rule written down somewhere that was God is a man in the sky, he has a beard, he controls everything and rewards and punishes people as they deserve. Because that's just the impression I had gotten somehow. And not true, it turns out, right? There is just such an incredible diversity of Jewish thinking about the divine, right? There are thinkers who think that God is everything, right? And we're all connected, we're all one. There are those who think that God is what happens in deep relation between two human beings, when they really are contemplating each other in their fullest humanity. What arises in that moment is God. There's someone who thinks that God is what makes for you becoming your best self. That process is God, right? These are not men in the sky at all, or women, or whatever. And I think, I wrote in my book, I had a God-shaped wall in my life, right? People talk about a God-shaped hole, and I had this kind of God-shaped wall where it was man in the sky, cannot surmount that. And I think once I disentangled God from being that controls everything to something just far bigger and more ineffable and also intimate, which is weird, a lot of contradictions, but then suddenly things get interesting, right? Then you can start learning and exploring and actually being open to this. But I think when you give people a God option that's just not plausible for a lot of us, I think a lot of us are okay, I'm spiritual but not religious, I'm agnostic, I'm an atheist, which is that's how I felt. But I think having the chance to learn more deeply and to see that there are other options was hugely helpful to me.
And the other thing you talk about that you did not think that you needed to find through your religion is a sense of morality and ethics.
Yeah.
And you write, I used to think that I didn't need Judaism or any religion to tell me how to be a good person. I know not to lie, cheat, and steal. I've spent most of my career in public service, and I've always had an overactive guilt reflex that, okay, you are a Jew. Such that I am totally the person who walks 10 blocks back to the store when I discover they've given me an extra 37 cents in change.
True. So true. Yeah, I really did think I am a good person. And I didn't think I needed religion to tell me how to be a good person. It's kind of intuitive, right? I think we all know the basics. But it turns out not true. Studying Jewish ethics, I realized, wow, there is a much higher bar. I did not think a lot about how I use my speech. Right? Gossip. We all gossip. It's cool. whatever. But reading all the Jewish thinking around gossip, like Jewish law, not big on the gossip, really not okay. And actually starting to study, when you actually think about the impacts that gossip can have. If I tell one person something off the cuff because I'm mad at you, so I go and I tell someone, oh, Dana's the worst. She's so irresponsible at work. She's so lazy. I just hate her. And then like we make up the next day. And it's like, okay, well, I've just told someone something bad about you. And what if that person tells other people? And then what if one of those people is kind of going to get your resume for a job and remembers, oh yeah, I heard some bad things about her. I better put this one to the back of the pile, right? Like it was such an offhand, thoughtless thing. And yet it had a real impact on your life. And I never really thought about the ethics of gossip before. And there's just a lot of stuff like that in Judaism that makes you stop and think about your daily actions and the impacts that they can have, beyond don't lie, cheat, and steal. It's a much higher bar.
So do you approach this both on an intellectual level, an academic level, and a spiritual level? Meaning, you're already a good person. You knew not to steal, cheat, and lie. But do you now change your behavior based on what you've learned and what you've read?
I actually have. Not enough. I still gossip. I'm still nowhere near enough, but I actually find myself...
That's why God made Yom Kippur.
Exactly, right? Total get out of jail free card. I mean, just wipe it all clean then. No, but I do, right? I actually find myself in the moment before I'm going to say something thinking, this is like that story I read in that text, and I feel a little twinge of guilt. It's like I kind of know this is wrong. Do I still say it? I sometimes do. I am not some great role model of this stuff at all, but it is a different approach. I also think about, even just like shaming people. Judaism is so against shaming or embarrassing people. So I find myself, thinking like, could this embarrass this? I better think about this. So it sort of adds a little pause in my life, which is really valuable.
And we're coming up on the Jewish holidays, and you write extensively about that, and particularly for Jews who are, again, have a Jewish identity, maybe are more culturally Jewish. Many, I would say most of them, go to high holiday services. And that's another area, let's just start with Rosh Hashanah, where you had one perception of it. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, which is coming up at the end of the month. One perception of it without studying, and now you look at it completely differently.
That's right. I mean, my perception of it previously was like, this is long, boring, and incomprehensible, and I don't know why I'm here. My overall perception, when I got a little deeper, I would, there's a prayer called Unatana Tokef, which is like, essentially seems to be saying, God is a man in the sky who rewards good people, punishes bad people, and like, good luck with that, right? That seems to be the theology of it. But having actually studied that prayer now, the book of the Bible that prayer most frequently quotes from is the book of Job, right? Which is a book about God punishing a totally innocent man kind of just for kicks. And when Job confronts God, God is like, you don't know what it's like to be me, back off, right? It's not a great book to cite if you're trying to promote a clear reward and punishment theology, which made me think about, wait a second, this prayer is a lot more complicated than I thought. Like there's a lot of subtweets going on in Jewish liturgy, right? There's a lot of like interesting edginess to it. So I think the more I study and learn, that is a cognitive experience, but it makes me have a very different emotional and spiritual experience. So I think sometimes people are very tempted to kind of see the degrees that I have and be like, oh, Sarah, you want this egghead intellectual Judaism where you sit alone in a room and study. And it's like, that's not true, because I'm actually not really that into like old school Jewish study in the way they're thinking. But, the study is actually the precursor to the emotional experience. There's a prayer called Moda Ani, which basically means I am grateful. It's the first prayer that traditional Jews say when they wake up in the morning. They say, I'm grateful. And look, you can say this prayer, Moda Ani, all the time, but if you don't know that it means I am grateful, it may take you somewhere, but not to gratitude, which is what Rabbi Jeff Roth, who's a teacher of mine, once said. And I think there's a lot of like, oh, just say the words, let them wash over your soul. And like, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. It will take you somewhere, but maybe not where it's intended to take you. Yeah. So I think that learning is just so important.
So on that note, since we're skipping around the Jewish calendar, you talk in the book about a banana. And you totally didn't go where I thought you were going to go with it, but a banana on the Seder plate. And of course, I thought, as you mentioned in the book, something along the lines of what we do, you put a, or a lot of people do, you put an orange to signify that women do have rights. But the banana took you in a completely different direction. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I went to a Seder a few years ago, and there was, in addition to like 18 other fruits, there was a banana on the Seder plate. And I just thought, like, okay, guys, you got the orange for the women and the olive for peace in the Middle East. And I was like, this is a little silly, but okay. And then we actually got to the part of the Seder that was about the banana, and it was a story about a Syrian refugee family that had come over, that had been fleeing Syria on a boat, and it had sunk, and 3 of the 4 members of the family were killed, and the 4th was the little boy, the 3-year-old boy who washed up, his body washed up on the beach. We all saw that photo, and it told the story of that family and how every day after work, the father would bring his little sons a banana because they loved bananas. It was like their special treat. And, it kind of asked the people at the Seder to really reflect on this journey, this Exodus journey that this family was taking, and the journey that we as Jews believe in some way, whether literally or not, was taken by the Jews from Egypt. And, look, there's a lot on the Seder plate. Maror, there's the bitter herbs and the matzah and this and that. And it was amazing to me that the banana, this like totally weird random object, was the one that made all the other ones come alive, right? Like it was just so amazing to me what they had done with that. And I thought, like, that's what we need to do with our holidays, right? It wasn't changing the holidays, wasn't saying Passover is really about something else. It was a little moment that helped us truly understand the meaning of this holiday. And so I think we need to find those banana on the Seder plate lessons for our holidays and our rituals, because that is what makes this come alive.
So well said. You should think about writing speeches for a living.
I'll think about it. I don't know.
So you mentioned several rabbis, and for people who know, like my mom, who's a Jewish educator, and she said to me, she talked to so many different people. You talked to so many people, not just for the book, but just for your journey, of all denominations in Judaism. Why and how did you come to do that?
Yeah, it is funny. In addition to your mom, a number of people have said, like, I don't think there's ever been a place that all of these rabbis have been mentioned on one page, because I have super ultra Orthodox folks, I have like way out there renewal folks, I have everyone in between. And it was I kind of just started meeting them, right? Like you meet one person and they say, oh, you should meet this amazing rabbi I know. And then that rabbi says, oh, let me introduce you to my friend. And you kind of begin to get this amazing community of rabbis. And, I take something from all the denominations of Judaism, right? Like I am not a member of any particular denomination, but, interestingly enough, one of the people I most relate to when talking about Judaism is a woman who considers herself ultra-Orthodox. We have an entirely different practice and approach to life, but there is no one I feel more comfortable talking with about the divine and about Judaism and about Jewish texts, right? Like that's strange, right? Because we have such different practices, but I feel like we all have Jewish souls, right? And I think that our texts are this common point, right? The Torah, the Talmud, our key texts, like these are a point we can all return to. And even if we disagree completely on how to interpret and understand them, they still are our common ground. And so I think I've bonded with a lot of these people over our kind of like nerdy appreciation of our Jewish heritage through text. And they've all taught me something. Even the really, really out there renewal people and the really, really ultra Orthodox people and the real, they've all taught me something. And I'm grateful to all of them. And
so you don't consider yourself as a member of any of the denominations?
No, I don't. And I think, it's gotten interesting in some of the interviews I've done with reporters where they're trying to understand. It's like, okay, so you don't keep kosher except for you don't eat pork and shellfish, and you don't seem to like rigorously observe Shabbat. So like, what are you? Like, are you, they're like, but why not? It's like there's sort of a sense of wanting to kind of catch me. It's like, oh, she's not really Jewish. But, that is defining Jewish in a very traditional way, right? Where Judaism is, you follow these ritual Jewish laws. Yes, but there are also lots of ethical Jewish laws, right? I follow those. There is also a Jewish law that says that we should study. I do a lot of that, right? There are so many different ways to be Jewish, and I think that's a key point I want to make with the book. Like, there are so many different ways to do it, and I think a lot of people are just doing the most interesting, innovative things with Judaism right now, And so I think it's an exciting future.
Well, and you talk about something that I know I've experienced, and probably anybody who did not grow up in the Orthodox community experiences is when you go into a more traditional setting than you are used to. It is so intimidating.
It is so intimidating, and I am still intimidated.
Do you know the blind man story by heart, or do you have it in here that you talk about it with the intimidation?
Oh, with the torch, yes.
I have a little tag here if you want to
my
read
spirit animal. I love that. Yeah.
To me, that was the best explanation, or the best story to explain why you shouldn't be intimidated.
Yeah, I mean, the story, which I totally love, it's a story from the Talmud, which is an ancient Jewish text, sort of a bunch of commentaries. And it talks about how a man is out one night and he is, a blind man is out and he is holding a torch. And another man comes upon him and says, okay, why, like you actually can't see the light or the dark. So why are you carrying a torch? And the blind man says, I'm carrying it so that people will see me and can come help me if I need it. I just thought, like, what a beautiful idea. The sort of the power of carrying a torch, right? Of just putting out there, like, okay, I don't know what's happening, right? And I think not having been raised in a really observant household, I still get very anxious in really observant spaces because I'm convinced there is some special little ritual somewhere that I haven't learned about, and I'm gonna be busted, right?
There is,
right? They're gonna know.
I guarantee you there
is. And I do really well with the Shabbat dinners until we get to what's called the benching. Those are blessings that are said after the meals, and they're just so fast. And they're all in Hebrew, and I can't, and that's the moment where I feel like I have just been crushing it, and that's when they know. They can see me faking it and mouthing it. I had someone just come over to me and kind of take the book from my hand, the little prayer book, and turn the pages and hand it back to me, and it was like, yeah.
The torch.
That's the torch. It was fine. It was all in Hebrew, so I couldn't even keep up, but it was still very nice.
And one of the things you actually said to me on the phone, because we were talking about going to Hebrew school once a week and maybe once, on Sundays and maybe once during the week and getting ready for bar bat mitzvah and so on and so forth, and how that leaves a lot of people who are not doing it every single day feeling intimidated or frankly uneducated. And you said to me, Judaism is not meant to be a once a week lifestyle, which is so true, which is what makes it intimidating.
This is the thing, I think we've tried to make Judaism into this kind of American style religion, right? With a Sunday school and kind of a once a week thing that we do. And the thing is, we've spent most of our history in these really insular communities where Judaism was a lifestyle, right? It was what you ate, what you said when you got up in the morning, what you did with your community. It was an all-encompassing lifestyle. And so now we don't live that way anymore, right? Which I think is great. We live in, very diverse, really assimilated communities, which I think is actually quite wonderful. But the question is, okay, how do you do Judaism now, right? What does it become when it's not your daily life, when it's not every minute of your existence? And I think it's really tough. We kind of dump the whole responsibility onto Hebrew school teachers, and we're like, okay, please teach these children this 4,000-year-old, very baffling religion and teach them to read Hebrew, and we'll give you 2 hours a week. Thank you. It's a lot. So I do not know the solution. I really don't. I don't. My book was sort of my attempt at saying, okay, no one has time to spend 4,000 hours reading and studying and learning, but I did, right? So I kind of tried to take what I learned and condense it down into a book.
And you did. I mean, it's really remarkable.
Thank you.
So I know we want to take some questions. There's just one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is death. There's so many, Judaism has so much to say about so many life cycle events. And you really zero in on death. And you tell the story about somebody in a group talking about a non-Jew, about his inability to he was grieving for his parent and couldn't find closure and was told about what Jews do.
Yeah, it's just a guy I met at a conference, and he was just like, I'm angry, I'm depressed, I don't know how to process this. So I told him about all of the Jewish mourning rituals, which are they're so extensive, and they're very much designed to make sure that you neither deny your grief nor drown in it. Right? It is this series of steps of okay, for 7 days, you're just out. You're doing what's called sitting Shiva. You're with your community and your family. And then, okay, for 30 days, you do a few more things. And then for a year, it's sort of this gradual walking you out of grief. And the message to those who are mourning is no, you're not okay. And you know what? You're not going to be okay for a long time. And this loss will continue to hurt for the rest of your life, right? It'll get better. It'll become manageable. But, I think secular society is like stiff upper lip, get on back to life. You'll be fine. And Judaism doesn't say that, right? It really does give you this incredible support and ritual to get through this very difficult time. And I think I think secular society kind of honors life cycle rituals by making them consumer events, right? It's like, oh, you're having a baby. Here are 8 billion things you need to buy, or you're a terrible person. Like, you're getting married. Here's all this money you need to spend on a wedding. Whereas that's not what Judaism does, right? It's really looking to support you and to honor you and to kind of help you through this transition, which is so important because I think we all need that help.
Amazing. It's really just a
Thank
terrific
you.
book. Okay, I'm guessing that there are a few questions here. We can open it up to questions. There's already somebody at the mic. The microphone is here, and there's one over here as well, and we can alternate. Can you tell us your name? And let's try to keep it, as we heard earlier, to questions, not comments.
My name is Nathan Weissler, and I'm a college student here in the Washington, D.C. area. I read that President Obama appointed you to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council, and my question is, what has your work there consisted of? What has your work on the Holocaust Memorial Council consisted of, and what would you say are some of the most meaningful experiences that you have had in that capacity, and how would you say that your experiences there has influenced your work on this book?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was an incredible honor. He did appoint me, and it's been an incredible honor to serve on that council. A lot of the work that we do is just advising the museum on their extraordinary work to memorialize the Holocaust, to ensure that never again is real. And I think for me, I remember sitting on one of the meetings where we're in this beautiful, beautiful museum that is just so state of the art and beautifully, so well done. And I just remember thinking to myself, okay, I had relatives who were killed in the Holocaust, right? Who didn't leave in time, didn't make it to America, lost their lives, and just having this moment of thinking, like, if only they could see this, right? It's like I am here several generations later in this museum designed to honor their lives, and I have had these extraordinary opportunities in America. So I think it's something that's given me just a tremendous sense of gratitude and also desire to give back. So it's been a great experience for me.
Thank you. You guys can come over here also. Go ahead.
Hi, Rami Schwartzer. I work as a rabbi in the DC area. You might say the answer is to read the book, which I will do.
It's just out. No one's read it. It's all good.
Or that it's impossible to answer this. What I'm struck by in your story is the way that you really recognize what I like to call the hokey pokey piece of it, that you've gotten your whole self out because you've put a whole lot into it. And that's incredible and inspiring. And it's something when I think about my work in the community, it's very hard to imagine saying that to somebody, the answer being you have to put in the work. So I'm wondering what your message is to Jewish leaders and to the whole Jewish community here, and thinking about how we continue to promote the wisdom of our tradition as you've found in a culture that feels overworked and it certainly doesn't think about putting all the work in.
It's a centrally important question. I mean, you can't say that, but I can.
Yeah, exactly.
And, it's like, you're a rabbi. If you say it, you're kind of a jerk. But if I say it, it's like, look, I wish I could say, like, just doing Jewish bowling, that'll make you Jewish. Or like, oh, it's Rosh Hashanah, let's make apple and honey teenies because apples and honey. Like, that's like,
Is that a thing?
that's a thing. I made it up, but I think it should be a thing. I don't know. Let's make it a thing. Let's make
It's
it
a thing.
I mean, that stuff is fun. And, but the truth is, like, this is a really sophisticated adult religion, right? And if you want to engage deeply with that as an adult, it does take some amount of knowledge, right? But you do not have to spend thousands of hours reading like I have done, right? That's crazy. People have jobs and families they are raising. People do not have time to sleep, right? So I think they should sleep first. That's important. But, you can do small things, right? People generally manage to read a book every so often. You can read a book, right? It could just be one book. There are lots of great Jewish books out there. People listen to podcasts. There are amazing Jewish podcasts, right? There's so many ways to engage. Maybe you just decide, okay, I'm going to do Shabbat for an hour. on Friday night from 7 to 8 p.m., I'm going to shut off my phone and have dinner with my family. That's great, right? But you do have to do something. You do actually have to do the learning, because I think Judaism just doesn't make sense if you don't know something about the history. You'll often hear Jews say, well, our rabbis said this. And it's like, they're referring to these ancient rabbis from 2,000 years ago. It's like, sorry, who are the rabbis? It's like, oh, when the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70, then we had, it's like, what? Like, there's so much knowledge that's kind of useful to have before you can really start learning. And you do have to put in a little bit of work, but I don't think it has to be that much. So I wish I had, I feel bad. Well, I can just come with you to events and I can say that. And then you can be like, no, you don't have to do the work.
Or you could say, here, read this.
Exactly.
I can be your bad cop.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Hi. Hello. A couple of rabbis in a row. I really empathized with your story about religious school. Somebody who has got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and despite the fact that I'm a rabbi, it's still a struggle. So to put you on the spot, you may never decide to have children, but I'm curious what you would do differently. Because
That's a great question.
I mean, as somebody who is a leader in this space, I struggle just as much, I think, as somebody who, I hated day school, but I became a rabbi in spite of it. So yeah, I'm curious what you would do differently.
I think the most important thing we can do, and this is something you've already done, in spades, but I think we have to grow up as adults in Judaism. I think most of us, like me, when I say most of us, I'm saying me, we stopped learning at age 12, and then we kind of hand down what Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman calls our pediatric Judaism to our kids. We're like, God's a man in the sky, holidays are boring, okay, the end. Like, that's, that's a little tough, right? It's like, we're not really into it, and our kids kind of realize, and they're like, why should I be into it, right? I think we kind of have to grow up and find an adult Judaism, however that is for each person. I can't prescribe that. It's a totally personal thing. And I think even if your kids hate Hebrew school, they see you loving Judaism. And I think that is having so much more of an effect than you can ever imagine, right? Like, I think, even though I hated Judaism, I saw my family appreciating it, right? That left a mark on my heart, I think. And so I think that is probably one of the most important things we can do. We'll also make all these poor Hebrew school teachers' jobs easier. If we've actually, tried to give our kids something at home, I think that will help. But it's a tough challenge.
Come on, guys. This is not a shy group.
I mean, all right. Hey. What's
Hi,
up,
Sarah.
Eric?
I'm Eric Stahl. I was curious if you can comment on guilt. And if you think Jews should really step up
Guilt
their
or gelt?
Guilt.
Guilt is
And
also
if
a
Jews
Jewish
should
thing.
step up their candy game.
So gelt are those chocolate coins that we get at Hanukkah. Guilt is the driving, animating force of all Jews' lives. No, I'm kidding. It's such an interesting question. I actually, I haven't really looked into guilt a lot, but it is a thing that we feel, and I think it's great. I know that's counterintuitive, but I think guilt
Do you feel
is...
guilty saying that?
I mean, you know what? No. I actually think guilt... I think shame is terrible. Shame is not okay, right? Shame is like, I am bad. No. Guilt is like, I am good and worthy, but I've done something that's not worthy of me, and I feel a little bad about that. So shame, absolutely not. But guilt is, I think, what drives us to be better people, right? It's like that little prick of conscience that's like, I shouldn't have said that. I should apologize. Or like, you know what? I need to show up for that person in need, even if I find them really annoying. So we do have a lot of it, and I'm a big fan of it. The problem is I think we often confuse it with shame. And shame I am not a big fan of, and we have too much of that. So that I would like to totally get rid of. But guilt, all for it.
And what about guilt?
Guilt, I love chocolate. So guilt, 100%. Thumbs up for both.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Dan Weiss. I have a comment and a question. The comment is somebody told us when our children were little, if you want to grow Jewish adults, send them to Jewish summer camp. And certainly that worked for me. That's worked for one of out of our 3 kids, so that's not too bad. But here's the question for you. When I was growing up, which is a while ago, I grew up in a shtetl, basically, a suburb that was 80% Jewish. So
Where'd you grow up?
Oak Park, Michigan, which borders Detroit. And so, my high school is 50% Jewish, all that sort of thing. Judaism surrounded me. And the question is, what kind of environment did you grow up in? Was it similar or was it different from that?
It's very different from that. I grew up in a suburb of Boston, which did have a pretty vibrant Jewish community, but it was, maybe 10%, which is quite a lot when we're 2% of the population. So we had a vibrant Jewish community, but I wouldn't say that it was that kind of environment. But summer camp, every study shows that Jewish summer camp is what is a good predictor for Jews' engagement in Judaism later in life. I never went. I have friends who did, and I'm kind of jealous.
It worked for me.
I mean, right here. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jenny, and I'm wondering if you found a practice for this month of Elul for introspection that's been working for you.
That is a great question. A reporter recently asked me that, and I was sort of caught a little bit off guard because the answer is actually no. I know it's Elul, which Elul is the month before this big Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, and these Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are very much about taking stock of your life and, really thinking about the kind of person you've been, making atonement for your sins, etc. And I don't have a formalized practice of that. But I have begun just in kind of rare, quiet moments to actually meditate a little bit and then just start thinking about, okay, New Year's coming up, how do I want this to be different? And I think a lot of it actually has to do with how I want to talk about this book and what I want to share with people. So I think that's been a lot on my mind in the process of, releasing a book, which is so all-encompassing. But I don't actually have a really good formal practice. There is one listed in my book that my friend Abby Pogrebin developed with a friend that I would recommend. I might try it next year, maybe. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Risa. I had 2 questions, and that was one of them, so I feel really excited that I'm curious how gender comes into your understanding of your role in Judaism, and I was particularly struck by your thoughts on gossip and Lashon Hara, and I think some more recent commentary I've read around actually like reclaiming Lashon Hara as like the critique of Lashon Hara sometimes maybe comes from like policing women's speech, right? And so how do we find ourselves as women in this ancient tradition that wasn't made for us or by us?
That's a great question. And
really
I think,
good question.
Basically for those who don't know, our key holy text is the Torah, which is the first 5 books of what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. And we then basically like spent 500 years interpreting it and creating this massive commentary called the Talmud. And that was all written by men, right? Men, by men, for men, of men, no question. It's funny. I've always grown up, and I've never been. My Judaism takes place in entirely egalitarian spaces, and I would say that the non-egalitarian parts of American Jewish life are relatively small. I think you're talking about 10 to 15% of American Judaism. The rest of it is basically egalitarian, but you still make an important point that like this is written by, for, and of men. And I think the answer to that is we reinterpret it. We reclaim it. I mean, that interpretation of Lashon Hara, I didn't know that.
I didn't either, but it makes sense.
It makes sense. And now I'm sort of beginning to think, I need to go back and I need to read some of that, right? Like you have just given an example of exactly what you do, which is we bring our fresh, diverse perspectives to this and we reinterpret it, which by the way, that is the most traditionally Jewish thing we can do. Right? Those rabbis 2,000 years ago, they decided to reinterpret the Torah, right? We've been reinterpreting our holy texts for 2,500 years. Basically, I mean, even if you look at the Torah, they're clearly kind of arguing, the writers are kind of, I believe it was written by people. Some believe it was written by God. You do you, whatever you want. But, you can even see the authors kind of disagreeing with each other. So I think that what we do is we reclaim it, we reinterpret it, and we get more diverse voices into the room, which is definitely what's happening in the Jewish spaces that I'm in.
Can I just ask you a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
So you're a lawyer. You're trained as a lawyer.
Technically.
No, but it's the same dynamic.
It's exactly. I mean, you look at the U.S. Constitution, like we don't live by an original version of the Constitution. If we did, that would be horrific, right? We live by an interpreted version. We've spent 200 odd years passing, handing down Supreme Court cases, passing amendments. We have changed it. And it's the same thing with the Torah, our key holy text. We have spent 2,500 years reinterpreting it. So when people say like, oh, the Torah is so sexist and it's so violent, like, yes, so is the original draft of the Constitution. Fortunately, we don't stone people for working on Shabbat anymore because we've reinterpreted it. And that kind of constant reinterpretation, I think, sometimes Jews just don't realize how much we've changed our understanding of our text. And you're right, it is a very lawyerly discipline.
Hi, my name is Sherry. I was wondering, as you clearly talked to so many people with different Jewish voices in your research, just as you were on this journey, what did your conversations look like with people of other faiths? And were there things that you learned about Judaism and about your own faith from those conversations?
I love talking to people from other faiths. I think I learned a tremendous amount from them. One of them is here tonight, a good friend of mine who is a very passionate Christian. And I find Christians are much more comfortable talking about God than Jews are, right? There's sort of more of that just seems to be more of the ethos of Christianity, a real sort of comfort talking about God. And that is something I've found really interesting and kind of fun in exchanging with them. I have a good friend who's Muslim, and we talk about, her faith and her perspective. So it has played a role. I'd like it to play much more of a role. I haven't really gotten to formally study other faiths, and that's something I want to remedy. So I'm hoping to maybe take an online course or do some reading, because I think each of these traditions has incredible moral wisdom to offer. They're each different, but they each have something to offer.
David Cohen. So now that you've published the book, what comes next beyond signing it?
Yes.
I see your father over there. Were you the one who planted that question?
My dad is here. So, it's funny, I would like to write another book. In writing this first book, I think so the chapters that I found most challenging were really around God and the divine and prayer. And that was something I think I wanted to get more deeply into. So I'd love to write another book that focuses on that. But, you have to sell your first book or else no one will pay you to write another book. So, my energy now really is on sharing this with others. And it's just such a joy to hear from people about it, to get asked questions about it, to be challenged by it. I spent a decade hiding from reporters, and now I talk to them, and they're really smart, right? Like, Deanna's really smart. She asks great questions. So it's I'm learning a lot as I do this, which I think will be helpful for whatever I do next.
We have time for one or two more questions. If you have a question, please scurry up to the mic. Maybe Deanna has a
Well, since we started with Mrs. Obama and we're ending with Mrs. Obama, I think you told me about your conversation with her when everyone was leaving, the administration was over, and the obvious question for everybody is the afterlife. What are you going to do next? And talk about your conversation with her about this book.
Yeah, she really encouraged all of her staff to go and do something they were passionate about. She told us all, you are amazing. I am proud of you. You should all be doing things that you love with your lives. And so when I told her I wanted to write a book about Judaism, I think she was like, oh, okay. And she's like, Sarah, that's great. I'm proud of you. You're doing what you are passionate about. And I think she was really excited about it and really supportive. So it was just, it meant a lot to me. And that the tweet she sent, I basically spent the afternoon just looking at it and crying. So
I bet your publisher did too.
So it was amazing. So yeah. Hello.
Hi, my name is Sarah.
Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
She is the CEO of Supergirl, an amazing kosher vegan soup company.
Wait, what? How do I not know about
kosher vegan soup? It is amazing.
See me after class.
Seriously, it's in Whole Foods. It's in Costco. It's the best.
Oh, this is about you. So, this book seemed to take 20 years to write. How long did it really take you, and did you truly enjoy it? Because this seemed enormous.
Sarah is a dear friend of mine who has watched me go through this. It basically took about 2 years to write, although I'd been reading for a few years before then. It really was a 4-year project. That would have been a humane way to do it. I sort of didn't ask for enough time. By the time I realized it, just decided to kind of plow through. So this was like a 70-hour-a-week kind of project, 60 to 70 hours. It was very intense. It was austere. I wouldn't say it was like fun. That's not the right word, but there was a lot of joy in it and a lot of pleasure and just a lot of real satisfaction and a feeling of purpose. Like, this is what I want to be doing. I am passionate about this. Like, I never woke up and thought, ugh, I don't want to do this, right? I was like, this is hard. I am struggling with this, but it's really important. So I felt motivated. I felt passionate about it the whole time, despite all of my complaints to you. So yeah, I feel lucky every day that I got to write this.
It's amazing.
Thank
Mazel
you.
tov.
Thank you.
Well, that's what friends are for, right? Sarah, Mazel tov. Congratulations.
Thank you. Dana, you are the best. Thank you.
You are.
It's a joy.
Congrats.